Hey, so today we're talking about Venti and why I don't like his existence in the game. This video is going to be a character analysis / rant, with the actual analysis happening in the second half of the video, and my opinions happening in the beforehand. I will have timestamps in the description if you want to just jump ahead, you can. However, if you want to listen to me rant, I would really appreciate it. So, actually, originally this video was going to be why I don't like Venti. And then I started thinking about it for a while, and it was just like, no, I just outright hate this character. A lot of it just comes with Venti's gameplay and like how he actually plays, because to me, Venti is one of the most boring characters in the game. He is quite literally a delete button. You just click a button and you watch things die. Now I can understand that being fun like the first couple of times that you do it, but then after that, like you use him for a while, how does that not get boring? Like people that actually use Venti, how do you like still want to use him after a while? Like, I don't get how that's fun. Like, you're not even playing the game at that point. You're literally just watching things die. A lot of characters can't even hit things while they're in Venti's black hole, because he lifts them up off the ground, and very few characters actually do it. You can actually have, like, an engaging combo with that. Like, you can throw down Xiangling's Goba, switch over to Venti, use his ult, and then switch over to Ganyu, and just kind of, like, melt. But that requires you to have both Venti and Ganyu, and also that requires you to actually make Venti fun instead of him just being fun in general. And the biggest thing for me is that, like, you're playing a completely different game at that point. Because Venti is just so stupid broken, especially when it comes to large groups of small enemies, you're not actually playing, like, the core combat of the game, which is, like, the biggest part of this game. You could argue that exploration is big as well, but exploration really only happens one time, and then after that you don't really explore anymore because that feeling is gone. But the combat happens all the time. You're always going to be fighting something. So when you have a character that just destroys the combat essentially, because you're not even dodging enemies, you're not even hitting the enemies, because Venti doesn't let you hit them. You're not dodging their attacks, or you're not engaging with your enemy. You're quite literally just watching them die. You press a button and they die. How is that fun? That being said, Venti's rerun banner is coming out. It's probably already out at this point. Should you summon for him? Yes. You'd be kind of an idiot to not summon for Venti, which is exactly why I'm not summoning for Venti. The big thing with Venti is that he's not a necessarily needed character. He is helpful to you if you lack skill, because Venti himself just supplements so much skill, quote unquote. So if you're actually struggling with the game, I would recommend picking him up, because Venti is a very timeless unit, and we're going to talk about this more later in the video, but nothing is ever going to be better than Venti. Venti is always going to be, well, maybe not always, but for a very large majority of the game, Venti is going to be the best at what he does. He's never going to get Powercrept, which is a word that we're going to talk about in a little bit, because everything in the game, especially for gacha games, things that are unique never get Powercrept, which like I said, we're going to talk about that, because things in gacha games, unique things in gacha games, are never going to be like outdone. They're always going to stay unique, and Venti is unique enough, especially in a game like Genshin. So being able to get him right now, he's going to be years worth of investment, because I don't think we're going to have ever anything, at least for a good couple of years, that is even close to what Venti does. But to really understand what makes Venti so strong, we have to understand a term called Powercreep. Now, Powercreep is the idea that a unit in the future is generally better and completely outclasses or trivializes a pre-existing character. Now, I see people throwing this around a lot, especially with the recent addition of Hu Tao. People were talking about a little bit with Ganyu as well, but mainly with Hu Tao. And I feel like 90% of the people that are talking about Powercreep don't actually know what Powercreep is. Powercreep implies that a character is similar enough to another character to just straight out outclass them. This is extremely common in gacha games, so much so that you cannot have a gacha game without Powercreep, because that's just the way that gacha games flourish and thrive, is through Powercreep. You continue to have this newer, shinier thing to get people to keep playing your game, and you just keep doing that for years and years and years. That is just the life of a gacha game. And unfortunately, that is what Genshin is. So when it comes to gacha games, Powercreep is a lot more common, because with those games, a lot of the characters usually have like a couple of stats. They usually have like an attack stat, a defense stat, whatever. That's really easy to power creep because you can just increase the number. With Genshin, that makes it a little bit more difficult because there are just so many variations when it comes to a character. Yes, they do have stats, yes, they do have those kind of things, especially with weapons, but the character themselves actually are unique enough that it makes it really hard to power creep because they have elements, they have their own elemental skill, their own elemental burst, and more importantly, artifacts. Artifacts make it really difficult for anything really to be power creep in Genshin, unless it's a mechanic change, which is exactly what Venti is. But when I said that people don't really understand what power creep is, they really like focusing on the character themselves instead of what is actually being the power creep. Because it's really hard to power creep a character. For a character to be power creep to another character, they would have to be similar enough to another character to make that other character obsolete. So basically what I'm saying is that like if we had Hu Tao, for her to be power creeping another character, she would have to be power creeping another Pyro Lance user, which is Xiangling, and Xiangling is much more support oriented, whereas Hu Tao is much more burst DPS kind of oriented. So they are completely different characters, completely different classes. Hu Tao does not power creep that. However, if you're looking at Hu Tao in terms of damage, yes, Hu Tao and Ganyu are incredibly strong characters, but it's not like that damage was unheard of before, and mostly what's making that damage come out is through weapons, more specifically the Staff of Homa, which a lot of people are using for Hu Tao, and like you see videos, Hu Tao doing like 1,000,000 damage, like yeah, Hu Tao is kind of part of that, but more importantly, it's because of the Staff of Homa. The character themselves is not getting power creeped. The weapons are the things that are going to be power creeped, and the artifacts, but artifacts aren't happening yet. They're going to happen in the future, but mostly the weapons, because we are technically already seeing that, especially with the Staff of Homa. Like one of the things that I think, personally, I don't actually know if this is true, but the Jade Cutter that came out recently with the Skyward Blade, or the Aquila Favonius rather, like why would you use either of those two weapons when the Jade Cutter exists? Like the Jade Cutter is just so stupid strong, why would you use the Aquila? Now, I don't have any facts to back this up. This is literally just me being like, the Jade Cutter seems really good. Why would you use any other weapon? It's kind of like a whale problem that I'm too free to play to understand, so don't take my word for it, but that's just what I think. So for a character to actually be power creep, we would need something like a fusion of two characters. I'm going to be using Xingqiu and Beidou for an example, because their ults are basically the same thing. So if we had another character in the future that did basically what Xingqiu and Beidou does together, i.e. they would be attacking with both Hydro and Electro, being able to trigger Electro Charge Elemental Reaction on their own, that is power creep, because at that point that completely invalidates Beidou. You could argue that it doesn't invalidate Xingqiu because he does have heals, but it's it for Beidou at that point, which that's not going to happen anytime soon. It's going to happen in the future, I guarantee you. That is going to happen. We are going to have something with dual elements. Either the character themselves are going to be dual elements, or they're going to have an elemental burst that is dual elements, so they would be able to trigger elemental reactions on their own. But like I said, that's going to happen in like probably year like 4 or 5 of the game, not anything anytime soon. And we'll get into why later, but that's basically what power creep is. So tying the conversation back to Venti, Venti himself is the power creep. Venti is quite possibly the most power creep unit you could ever have in a game like Genshin, because he just absolutely decimates everything in the game, at least for the content that we have right now. Which begs the question as to why did they even release Venti in the first place? Why did they make him the very first banner? And like always, I have two different viewpoints. The more pessimistic viewpoint, which, you know, kind of just paints MiHoYo as being a scummy company, which may or may not be true, and then the more logical one. So to start with the more quote-unquote illogical viewpoint, it all kind of like stems off the fact that somehow MiHoYo knew that Genshin Impact was going to be popular, which is not so far-fetched because Genshin is a very ambitious project in the sense that it's bringing two worlds together. You're bringing the PC MMO crowd together with the mobile gacha crowd, and that's just inherently going to be a larger audience because 1 + 1 is always going to be more than 1. So you have a large community to draw from, so it kind of makes sense that it's going to be popular. And also because this is not MiHoYo's first game, MiHoYo has developed other games, mostly gacha games, nothing in the vein that is Genshin, but they have developed other games, so they kind of know what they're working with. And one huge trend with games in general, not just gachas, is that the first release of your game is more often than not going to be the point that it's most popular. Unless you have like this really huge update in the future, the first week, couple weeks, month, whatever, is going to be the most popular time for a game. And MiHoYo knows this because, like I said, they have developed other games. So they made a unit like Venti, who was the most ridiculous unit that they can think of, because they want people to spend money in that early month of the game. Because they know that in the future, quite a lot of people are going to drop your game for another game because you were like the flavor of the month at the time, and now they're kind of over it and they move on. So they created Venti, a really obviously strong character at the beginning of the game to entice people to spend money for this character. Because if those same people ended up leaving in the future, they gave you money before they left, so at that point you already won. You already won in that scenario. You have their money. Sure, you lost a customer, but they already gave you money, which is all they really care about. So they made Venti, this really stupid broken unit, to get people to spend money in the early days of the game. Now, is that logical? No. Is it likely that it happened? Also no, and I do have a counter argument to this, but it is worth putting on the table as always, just because you never know if this could actually be true. We never know if anything is going to be true. Only MiHoYo does. But it's worth kind of talking about. So to talk about the actual logical point, is that MiHoYo didn't know that Genshin was going to be popular. So they made a character that was really strong, flashy, to entice people to spend money on the game. I know it's the same premise, but hear me out. Because they don't know that Genshin is going to be popular, they want to have characters and other aspects of the game that are intriguing enough to the player to continue to play or summon for those characters. So even if your game is not good or interesting, at least the characters that you have are interesting, and at least they do something interesting enough to be enticing to players. Now this is kind of like the main point, and there's a little bit more evidence to support this, is that if you look at the original 5 stars of the game, which I'm going to be referring to as the OG 5s, we have Diluc, we have Jean, we have Qiqi, Mona, and Keqing. When you look at the kits of those 5 characters, they are all incredibly strong characters, and they don't have really anything locked behind their constellations. Base kit them as a character is incredibly strong, and you can get by really well with just that character. And this goes back to what I said earlier, that even if your game isn't interesting, at least you have good characters or strong characters to make it seem like it's fun. Like, the characters themselves are fun, the characters are what is keeping people playing the game. So the same thing is with Venti. They made Venti with that same idea. And then in that same update we got Klee, which is kind of like the same thing. She is just a very strong character on her own. There's really nothing special about her, but she is exciting enough to get people to want to spend. And then after that 1.0 update was kind of like the changing point, the really big turning point for MiHoYo, because at this point they already knew that Genshin was a very popular game. At this point, MiHoYo knew that Genshin was a very popular game. They realized that they have something really good on their hands, so they want to take advantage of it. The problem is, they released Venti. Venti is the kind of unit that you would have on like year 5, year 6 of the game. When the game is dying, you need to keep interest in the player, so you make this absolutely cracked out unit that makes it seem like the game is still fun, even though it's not really. That's what Venti was. So Venti was a mistake. MiHoYo knows that Venti is a mistake. The community knows that Venti is a mistake. I know that Venti is a mistake. So they're trying to correct that. But the thing is, with Venti, you can technically nerf Venti, but they're not really ever going to do that. So what they need to do is they really need to slow the game down, because you can't have things be on par with Venti continuing the game like that, because at that point, your game's not really going to last that long, because it's going to be harder and harder to power creep that really ridiculous thing. So MiHoYo needed to backpedal a little bit, and that's exactly what they did in the 1.1, 1.2, whatever the child Zhongli one was. That was like the huge turning point. They realized, like, hey, we need to slow down. We need to milk Genshin for what it is as long as possible. So we need to slow down, but not just slow down. We need to go back in time. You can't go back in time, but they tried. So starting with Child was kind of like the first 5-star that the community was like, oh, this character's potential is locked behind constellations. He's a bad character unless you really spend money, unless you really wail on this character, which is incorrect, by the way. Child is still a very good character even without constellations, but people already had this preconceived idea of how Child was going to play, and when they realized that that idea was locked behind Constellation 6, that is what they wanted to say just to like fit their own kind of narrative. But regardless, the point there is that people thought that his potential was locked behind constellations. And this is like really conspiracy theory thing for me. So there is a little bit of merit to this in my opinion, but we're still going to talk about it. Is that right after Child, they realized this. They realized like, hey, we kind of pushed the envelope a little bit with Child. Let's keep pushing that envelope. Let's just keep pushing that envelope just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit more. And then they released Zhongli. And let me tell you, that envelope burst faster than anything. It burst faster than that one Mario Party 1 minigame, if you know what I'm talking about. Community outroar. Everybody was upset. You had people in the US upset. You had people in China upset. You had all of Europe upset. It was just like everybody was upset at MiHoYo. And for good reason. I'm kind of still upset at MiHoYo. Am I holding a grudge? Maybe. For good reason, in my opinion. But regardless, Zhongli was a character that was really locked behind constellations, in the sense that Zhongli wasn't even the character that he was supposed to be when he was released. In case you don't know, Zhongli was originally intended to be a main DPS character, which is why when he was actually released and people wanted to make him a main DPS character, they weren't like crazy or anything. It's not like Zhongli was supposed to be a support. He was supposed to be a main DPS, and people wanted to make him a main DPS. They had merit in believing that. But Zhongli was originally supposed to be a mix of physical and geo damage, and this is still evidenced in the game. You can see with his basic attacks. On some attacks, Zhongli actually attacks with a spear with his polearm, and then on other attacks he summons like this geo spear out of nowhere to attack with that. The attacks that were supposed to be with his actual weapon were physical damage, and the ones that he summoned were geo damage. But MiHoYo ended up removing that. Because, like I said, with Powercreep, they needed to really slow the game down, and having a character that was 2 hybrid elements at the time so early in the game, you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot right there. They actually really shot themselves in the foot with Venti because of that, because Venti is a unit that you would release so late in the game, they needed to backpedal. So they did that with Zhongli. They took what was supposed to be a dual element character and pushed him back, because that's going to be something like way later in the game. So they removed that. And because they removed that, his ult was originally supposed to be doing more damage against petrified enemies with geo and physical damage, but because you remove that on his basic attack, you're going to remove that on his ult. So with that, the petrification is not really necessary, so you nerf the petrification to be however long it was, to be like only 2 seconds that it is in the game. And also, originally, his stone steel was supposed to resonate with other petrified enemies. So like, if a petrified enemy was within range, they would resonate, like hitting every other enemy. But because you reduced the petrification time, there's really no reason to keep that resonance as it is, because you're not really getting much from that. So they removed that too. And what did that leave him with? That left him with a shield, and that was basically it. So that is why MiHoYo was just like, okay, he's a support character, because that's really all that he has at that point. You took away everything else, and now you're just trying to pass him off as being a support character because he has a shield. And this was really like the breaking point for me, as like, MiHoYo, you are just like not a good company. I don't like you whatsoever, and I'm very vocal about the fact that I don't like you. Was that moment right there, was when we got that really absolute BS response from MiHoYo that was just like, oh yeah, Zhongli is working as intended because he is a shielder, he has a shield, and shields prevent people from dying. Like, yes, thank you MiHoYo for telling me what a shield does. I really appreciate it. That was the breaking point for me. That's just like, okay, you're being absolutely ridiculous. It's so stupid. Before it was kind of like, okay, you have respect to me, this new game, whatever. And then that happened, and it was just like, okay, you're done. You're done. Get out. I don't care anymore. And then like 2 weeks later, they were like, okay, yeah, you know what? Maybe you're right. We're going to change him. He's not actually supposed to be a support character. We're going to make him better in a later update. Whatever. And it's not like they did that out of the goodness of their heart either. Zhongli, not that Zhongli necessarily lost money, but when you compare like the Klee banner to Zhongli, I don't remember what the graph looked like, but it's absolutely ridiculous. Like the huge spike at where Klee happened is like more than double what Zhongli was. So it's like, oh MiHoYo, oh we're losing money, people are mad at us, let's appease them, let's do some damage control and change Zhongli in the future. Whatever, that's the whole Zhongli thing. No, actually no, that's not the whole Zhongli thing. The main thing for me that makes me so upset is that the people that worked on Zhongli worked so hard, and the things with his animation is that there's so much attention to detail in what Zhongli actually is. Like I said earlier, the attacks where he wasn't attacking with his actual weapon were geo damage. But now, well, that was originally what he was supposed to be, and that is why the people that made miHoYo gave him that unique animation to signify that. But now that's gone because miHoYo decided to get rid of that. So now it's just a cool looking animation, but the meaning behind it is gone. So that like is really stupid, and that's what I really hate. And I don't know if this is actually true, but the same thing happened with his charge attack. His charge attack is that he rains down geospears, like he disappears and like rains down some geospears. That was also supposed to attack with geo damage, but because they removed that, it's just physical damage, and that's just kind of it. But the thing with his charge attack is that, in my opinion, I don't know, like I said, I don't know if this is actually true, but in my opinion, that charge attack is supposed to reference the Guyun or Guiyun, I don't actually know how it's pronounced, stone forest in the bottom right corner of Liyue. His charge attack is supposed to reference that, because if you don't know, like, the lore of Genshin, basically what happened was that a long time ago, that Hydra monster thing that we fought in like 1.3 or whatever, that threatened to that like a long time ago, and Zhongli rained down geospears to trap that monster underneath the stone forest. And the structures that you see that are like sticking out of the ground, those are the things that Zhongli sent down. So basically this man single-handedly ended the world ending, and that's exactly why he's my favorite character in the game. I love him so much. But regardless, I think that is what that's supposed to be a reference to. But now that the geo damage is gone, like, yeah, the animation is still there, but the meaning behind it is just completely gone. Like, I can't even imagine what it would feel like for the people that actually worked on Zhongli to just have all of that gone. Like, you worked so hard on this character, you're proud of it, whatever, and then all the meaning behind it is just gone. Like, I cannot have any respect for miHoYo after they do something like that. Am I blowing that out of proportion? Probably. But like, that's how I feel. But anyway, tying this all back to Venti. Venti is such a ridiculous unit that they needed to slow down the progression of the game to be able to keep it to go on for years and years and years. And unfortunately for Zhongli, they did that to him. They used Zhongli as a scapegoat. They used him as like the thing to test out the game to see what the public reception would be, and they completely gutted his character and just made him the way that he was. So Zhongli had to take the brunt of that, unfortunately. And I don't think they really did this on purpose. A lot of people like to think that they did it with Zhongli because he was a popular character, that no matter really what they did with him, people were going to summon for him, people were going to buy him, regardless of the fact, because he was already a good character. So you can like kind of test the reins with him a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it just happened to work out at that specific time. Like, they did it with Child, they realized it kind of worked a little bit, and then unfortunately the next 5-star just happened to be Zhongli, and that's why they used him. That's why they changed him absolutely last minute, because they realized that they could kind of get away with it. I don't necessarily think that they did it to him on purpose, it just kind of happened to work out that way, unfortunately for him. But regardless, that was all because of Venti. Venti was too good for the game at the time that he was released, so they needed to go back. So they needed to make quote-unquote weaker characters, at least weaker in comparison to him, so that the game doesn't just die incredibly fast, because like I said, with gacha games, you want them to last for years and years and years, continuing to increase the power creep ever so slightly every single time, and then you release a character like Venti at the very end. So looking at that, Venti already ruined a past character. Not necessarily directly, but more indirectly, but whatever. Zhongli happened because of Venti, is what I'm saying. But he also is currently, quote-unquote, ruining present characters. Have you ever noticed that pretty much every single character after Zhongli has been a DPS character? Or pretty much every other character has been a DPS character? Because after Zhongli, we had Albedo, who was a support DPS, then we had Ganyu, who's a main DPS, then we had Xiao, who's also a main DPS, and then Hu Tao, which is the main DPS. We have not had really any variety, and also Zhongli was originally intended to be a main DPS character, so if you still want to count Zhongli, you do. Everything we've had so far has been a main DPS character after Venti, and the reason why is because Venti is going to be the absolute strongest CC character in the game. They're never going to have anything that is better than Venti. God forbid. I would hate to see anything that is better than Venti. I don't want to see what happens when they power creep Venti. The day when Venti is power crept, I don't want to see that. And MiHoYo knows this, so they're not going to make a 5-star character that is a supportive character like Venti, because there's no reason to buy that character if you already have Venti. Venti is going to be the strongest version of whatever his class is. So if you did create another 5-star that was similar to Venti, that character is not going to make money. And MiHoYo only really cares about money. So that's just going to be a lost investment. I don't think we're only ever going to have DPS characters. It's just that DPS characters are the safest bet when it comes to Venti, because you can't have anything similar to Venti because Venti is just so good. Now, if we were to have a support character, we would have more of like a healer kind of thing, or like a damage modifier similar to Mona. But we're never going to have a CC character. I don't know if we're going to have one eventually, but we're definitely not going to have one in the near future, or probably within like a year, because Venti is just so stupid broken. And also to tie in with like why we're having DPS characters is that DPS is the safest bet. DPS is always going to be able to be power crept. You're always going to have a stronger character. You're always going to have stronger damage. But the thing is, when it comes to that kind of power creep, they're more so power creeping the weapons instead of the characters. But like I said, DPS characters are just safe. So MiHoYo doesn't want to ruin anything with any new kind of characters like that, where they know that just DPS characters are going to do just fine. And now that we've had such a huge chain of DPS characters, maybe we can start like introducing some other kind of things. But like I said, Venti is getting a rerun banner like right now, so we haven't actually had any new 5-star in this update. So I don't know what the next one is going to be, but it's definitely not going to be anything near Venti. And also a huge thing with Venti is that I'm scared at just what Venti creates just by existing. And what I mean by that is like harder content in the game. In order to keep a gacha game running like this, you always have to have harder and harder content, and then also creating stronger and stronger characters, or in this case stronger and stronger weapons, so that those weapons can make it easier to clear that hard content. Like they create a problem with hard content, and then they also create the solution with stronger weapons, so you use those stronger weapons to clear the harder content, if that makes any sense. So to do this, to actually make harder content, the developers of the game have to take into account what players are already using and what players actually have. Because if they already have, like if they want to make harder content, but then like Xiangling herself could just solo it, then like what's the point of that content being hard? If people can already clear it with Xiangling, they're not going to spend more on the game to be able to clear that content. So if they're making harder content in the game, they have to take into account Venti. And if you're going to make harder content for people that already have Venti, you're making content extremely hard for people that don't have Venti. And we've already kind of seen this with Abyss Floor 12. Abyss Floor 12 currently, which at the point of recording this video is the two not the hatchlings, the Geo Bishops, and then like the two big Ruin Guards, whatever they're called. We've already seen something like that, because Venti, while yeah, you can use Venti in Abyss Floor 12 and he still does it very well, he's not ideal in those scenarios because there's no small enemies for him to just group up. They're making that content harder for people that own Venti, and thus making it harder for people that don't even have Venti. But then also an aspect of something that is supposed to be hard but is just completely trivialized by Venti is the current Abyss Floor 11, specifically Chamber 2, you know which one I'm talking about, the one with the monolith in the center and you have to protect it, whatever. Venti just completely trivializes that floor. And it's like, we're probably not going to see anything remotely similar to that if they want to have harder content, which is why a lot of people think that, myself included, that a raid boss or a raid battle in general would be like a really good addition to the game, not just because it's kind of like an MMO style kind of thing, but because it doesn't necessarily make CC such a strong thing. So just like generally, I'm just scared of that. Because of Venti's existence, he's ruining current content, because we've already seen that with Abyss Floor 12, but like in the future, what are they going to have? What are they going to have that is extremely hard because Venti exists. So you can't use Venti in that thing to be able to be hard, so it's just going to be harder for like the rest of the population, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of like why I just absolutely hate Venti as a character. He's ruined past characters in Zhongli, he's ruining current characters, well, current diversity of characters, because we've only been seeing DPS characters. We're never going to see anything like Venti. We're never going to see a CC unit ever as a 5-star. Hopefully we can see them as a 4-star, kind of similar to what Sucrose is, but the thing is, Sucrose is not really like a CC unit. She's more of like a damage modifier, and that's what people use her as, because Venti already fills the CC slot. So hopefully we can see like a 4-star character that is CC, because that doesn't necessarily compete with Venti, if that makes any sense. So he's ruining current diversity of characters in the future. He could be also potentially ruining future characters. He's going to be ruining future content. The existence of Venti in Genshin is just not healthy for the game. He just makes too much of an impact. He makes too much of an impact on the game just as one unit that he ruins too much, and I don't like that. Am I blowing this all out of proportion? Maybe, but I gave you my reasons as to like why I think that. I feel like my reasons are justified. You can let me know, am I just being stupid? Am I being smart? Do you agree with me? Whatever, let me know in the comments. But I just don't like his existence. He hurts the game too much just by existing, and MiHoYo knows this, but they can't really do anything about it because he already exists. They could technically nerf him, like I said, but they can't really change like his core mechanics, which is the thing that makes him broken. That's why I don't like Venti as a character. He's not healthy for the game. We can't really do anything about it, and this really puts a lot of pressure on MiHoYo, because now they have to make content and things in the game with Venti in mind, which is really, that's such a huge crutch. They really shot themselves in the foot by just even releasing Venti as a character. So like, that's really just up to them. What they do is what they do. I hope they end up making it work out. But that's pretty much it for me. If you enjoyed the video, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Like and subscribe if you want. I would really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one, which is going to be a much more upbeat video and not just me like trashing a character. But I'll see you then. Bye-bye.